Okay, let's go ahead and get started on this one, which is also in this chapter that we're going through on JavaScript. It's an introductory chapter. It happens to be this chapter 3 on what are called conditionals. And really what we're talking about here are code blocks of code, such as the if block, as well as things such as if-else blocks of code, and these and switching. And so I always like to talk about the why these things are important, and these blocks of code, if you go to any programming language, you're pretty much guaranteed to see these things. The reason why you're going to see these pretty much in all languages is because they're very useful. And why they're useful and why they're so important is because they allow our programs to be smart. And I'll tell you what I mean by that as I start to code a little bit. So let me go ahead and get a script file up and running. Oh, I already have a script. So I'll make a file called conditionals.js. And again, so conditionals kind of make our program smart. And so, as a person, I'm able to make decisions every day. And some of the decisions I make are good, and some of the decisions I make are bad. But every day I make decisions based on conditions. And what these conditional statements do, meaning that they run conditionally, meaning they might not run all the time, is they allow our programs to make decisions. Again, sometimes they can make smart decisions depending on how we code them, and if we code them maybe not so well, maybe our programs make the wrong decisions. And so just like human beings, they can make good and bad decisions based on how we code them. Ideally we code them well and they're making good decisions in the perfect world, which will allow our programs to be smart and basically implement a lot of logic that are a lot of human logic is based on certain conditions in life. As a human, I got up to go to, like, my alarm was going off this morning, and I made the decision to get up and go to work based on the condition that I earn a paycheck and that I educate some students. And so as a human being, I made the decision to get out of bed and go to work based on a condition. And you do this all the time in your life. You will make hundreds of these things in a day, kind of thing. You're always making decisions based on conditions. Many of the students decided to go to school based on the condition that they get, have the opportunity to get gainful employment upon graduation. And so you made a decision in your life based on a condition. And that makes human beings smart, and that makes our programs smart. And so let's go ahead and kind of get a simple HTML form going. And this will be a we're going to ask the user their age. Please enter your age. And then based on their age, we're going to decide to do something or not. And so the scenario here that I always kind of demo this is like, please give me your age, and if you're above a certain age, you can do a thing, like get into a rated R movie. If you're not, then you don't get into a rated R movie. So I'll say ID here for my text box is text age. And then I'll have a button. And just because I See, 5.2 is still in beta, so I typically still switch back to 5.1. Let's grab the Bootstrap CSS. Not that this is critical for conditionals, but just because I like the look of Bootstrap more than the defaults in Chrome, and because it allows me to do simple things like a grid system and Bootstrap buttons. And classes form. Div call -6 times 2, and so we'll have, you know, 2 columns, and in the first column we're going to put all of our controls. Okay, and we'll put a little container and let's do a div class container. Around everything, format it. Okay. Now let's go ahead and wire up my script. My script was called Conditionals. And the defer attribute. And I'll just console.log hello world just to make sure we're wired up, as I typically do. Okay, we got that running. And now let's wire up a button click. Get element by ID. I think I called it button submit. On click equals anonymous arrow function. And now when we click, we'll do a console.log. Okay, console. Okay, we got a clicked event running. Now let's get into conditionals. Conditionals say run code conditionally based on whatever the condition is, right? So the syntax of an if statement is like this. Sometimes you're going to see, oftentimes you'll see the curlies kind of following, and what goes in here is the condition. So what goes in the parentheses, right? What goes in the parentheses is a Boolean condition. Okay, we're going to allow our program to make decisions based on conditions. Well, what goes in the parentheses is our condition. Why it's called a Boolean condition is because it must evaluate to true or false. You know, you could say something like if, 6 is less than 7. Well, 6 is less than 7. That is always true. So this will always be true. We don't necessarily want to say if 6 is greater than 7, then, that's not the best example. So let's instead get the user's age, and if the age is less than a cutoff, then or greater than a cutoff, then they're allowed to do something. Otherwise, they might not be. It is worth noting that in its simplest form, you can have an if block by itself. Right away, we're going to go from ifs, just like if statements and if blocks, to more complex blocks of code. but that's not always necessary. Sometimes, what goes in the if statement then, this is the code that runs conditionally. The code that runs based on the condition being true. And so if this condition is true, what goes in between these curlies will run and execute. If this if statement is false, then what goes between these curlies will not run, right? And so it's kind of like going back to like the alarm clock goes off, do you get up and go to work or you don't, right? And maybe, maybe there's nothing else, right? So you can run code if something is true and then just not run anything else if it's false. And so let's go ahead and read our variable from the form. I think it was called text age, and I think that was a text box, so we're going to read the value. And I'm just going to throw that in a console.log just to show you how you kind of want to step through this process and make sure that it's working. Now, it says uncaught syntax error, unexpected token parenthesis. Because my if statement isn't flushed out, it doesn't like that. So I'm just going to comment out my if statement. Now I don't get that error message. So this console is also used for troubleshooting, as I just demonstrated. Now if I throw in 1, 2, 3, you could see it's throwing that into the log, so that's what I'm expecting. So age holds the user's age. And we could say if age is greater than or equal to 18. Is 18 the age for a rated R movie?
17, I think.
17, all right.
I didn't know this. I used to work in a movie theater.
Yeah, you used to work in a movie theater? Yeah. Common job, right? So I had a friend that worked at a movie theater, and it was great. You get to see a bunch of movies.
I always recommend that job to anybody who's like, teenage or early 20s.
Yeah, you get to see a lot of good movies. Now, again, I'm getting some yellow squigglies here because, use strict. That's a good idea. And, unneeded white space. And my linter wants 2 spaces instead of 4. For the first indent, it's probably going to want a space there and a space there. And we need to fill in the if logic. And so maybe I'll just do a console.log. Welcome to the R-rated movie. Instead of doing this on the console, let's do an output paragraph, right? And maybe we just put that in the other P with an ID of output. Dot enter text equals welcome to the rated R movie. Period. My linter is strict, but we fixed all the problems. Let's check it out. And so if I say I am 22, welcome to the rated R movie. Now, if I refresh the page, notice if I'm 1 year old, I can click submit, and there is nothing that it does if you're not 18, greater than or equal to 17, I should say. Now, you could also say, Greater than or equal to is totally valid, but could you not also just say greater than 16? And so just a little side note, you can write this and say, okay, are you greater than or equal to 17 or are you greater than 16? I think intuitively a lot of people understand just greater than 16 a little bit better. So, you know, kind of a preference there, but okay, greater than 16 is the same as greater than or equal to 17. And this is only running this code if this is true. It's not doing anything if it's false, right? So again, what goes here, this is the true block, okay? Else it becomes the false block. And so we'll say document.getElementById output inner text equals, sorry, you can't see, oh, why did I do that? Can't see this movie. M-O-V-I-E. Now we have the false block. The else is always the false block. Okay, so if this is true, you do this. Else, it's false, and you do this. And now we get kind of this behavior. Welcome to the R-rated movie, but if you're 2, sorry, you can't see this movie. So again, very fundamental to just about any programming language is this concept of if-else. And if life was always this complicated, either you are or you aren't, very black and white, then coding if-else statements would always be this easy. But life is much more complex than black and white scenarios. Oftentimes it's, you know, it's just more complex than this. And so, you know, there might be, if you're less than 5, then you could see these movies. If you're less than 10, then you could see some other movies. If you're less than 15, you could see some other movies. And if you're less than, you know, if you're above 15, you can see any movies, right? So the life is more complicated than black and white scenarios. So I give you this, you know, very simple scenario 1 is true, scenario 2 is false, but that's not always the case. So let's kind of change this to be, okay, let's just do some different things based on your age and make a more complex scenario. You can say if the age double equals 1. Now I'm just going to kind of start with this.
Mr. G, I have a quick question.
Yeah, please.
All right, so when you outputted, like, oh, you can see the movie if you're above 16. You just kind of like put the text on the side. Can you like put like an alert to where it like pops up or something?
Yeah, I'm just putting it. So I made this output in a paragraph, and I just wanted it to be on the screen. But yeah, you could here is where I'm getting the output. So this line right here puts in the output paragraph the output that I put in this string, right? But if I didn't want to do that, I would replace this line with an alert like this. You with me?
Yeah.
Okay, so let me see here. Okay, my linter wants 3 equals. There's a difference between this and okay. I'm gonna keep this for right now. And okay. So what do I have here? Now I have a little alert that says you are 1 year old. Now if I put any other age, notice I don't get the alert. So that answers your question, like how to do it in an alert. But you know, I kind of preferred putting it in a paragraph, so I'll put back in my paragraph, which was get element by ID
Yeah, I was just kind of curious if like you could make like a custom message or like a pop-up or something.
Yeah. Okay, so now it says you are 1 year old, and now there it goes right there. Let's do this. Now notice that there's. Okay, let's talk about this. So single equals versus double equals versus triple equals, right? A single equal sign is the assignment operator. Okay, so this line 5 says take what's in the value of the text box and assign it to the variable age. That's called the assignment operator. Okay. Double equal sign tests a condition, right? So I want to say, hey, if the age equals 1. Well, keep in mind there's a lot going on behind the scenes. The JavaScript engines are kind of assigning data types for us. Well, when you read out of a text box, you might remember that age is actually a string. Well, you'll notice my number 1 here is not a string. So the data type is insensitive. So it doesn't really care if the data type is a string or it's a number. Keep in mind this is a numeric data type because it's not in quotes. If it's in quotes, then it's a string data types. So it's like, hey, this is testing to see if our age variable is a 1. And it doesn't care if it's a 1 in quotes or if it's a 1 outside of a quote. It's just checking to see if it's a 1. And that's the difference between a double equal sign that's type insensitive and a triple equal sign. Triple equal sign tests a condition with data type sensitive. And so now check this out. If I say if age triple equals 1, you notice it's not telling me you're 1 anymore. Because 1 here is actually a string 1, not a numeric 1. So here I've got a string 1 that's being stored in the age variable, and I've got a numeric 1 that I'm testing against. So I just got to make their data types the same. You know, I could just put that in a string. Now I'm testing a string against a string, and this should go back to working. Okay, so that's the difference between double and triple equals in JavaScript. My linter wanted a triple equal, so there you go. Else if age triple equals, in quotes, a 2. Okay, so and here, once 2 spaces, 2 spaces, I can change my settings here in Visual Studio. So expected exception block after expected exception block space or tab. Oh. My linter is picky. I could fix my default settings, and I'll do that so that it's less. Okay. So if I say 1, you are 1 year old. 2, you are 2 years old. Now notice 3, it doesn't change anything. So you could just keep spelling this out and be careful when you're doing that you're not copy and paste victim. Else if age is 3, you are 3 years old. Okay. Else, what I want to show is a final else block. Remember, else is always the false block. Okay, meaning this if isn't true, and this if isn't true, and this if isn't true. Else, I'm going to say I don't know how old you are. I don't know how old you are. Okay, so if this if is false, and this if is false, and this if is false, it's going to run this else block and say, I don't know how old you are. So any other age besides 1, 2, or 3, I don't know how old you are. 1, 2, 3, 1, 3, 2, 53, I don't know how old you are. So as life gives you more complex scenarios, as it will, you could test for equality, you could test for greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. And you know, here I changed my test values into strings. The other thing that I could have done is I could have turned this variable into a number. And you might remember parse int would actually do that, right? So if I take the value out of the text box and parse it into an int and store it in my age, then I can change this back to 1. Again, this is going to function just the same, but just showing you're comparing So this is a very simple if, else if block. Again, you could say else if age is greater than 3. You know, I don't know how old you are. Now this is actually a little bit different, what I just wrote here, than what I had before. Because, well, negative numbers, for example, are not greater than 3. So before I could have typed -10 and -10 would have said, I don't know how old you are. Now, -10 is not greater than 3. So if I launch my program, this is actually not as good because it doesn't work for negative numbers. All right, so I kind of like, now notice the else block, a big thing to notice here. There's no parentheses on an else block. There's only parentheses on an else if or on your if, because the if is where you test the conditions. And the way this works, it says if this is true, do that, then run this. Otherwise look here, and if that's true, do this. Otherwise look here, and if that's true, do that. Otherwise do this. You know, it's kind of like you're going, you know, you're going through this path, and only one of these 4 possible paths can you take. You're either going to take this path, or this path, or this path, or the last path. You're not going to take multiple paths. Only one of these is going to execute. So we've got one big block of code here, and only one output, right? So in these scenarios where you've got all these conditions, but based on all these conditions, you can only have one output. That's where you use this if, else if, else if, else if scenario. Okay, so in a real world scenario, if you only have like one output, that's when you do this. Okay, it can be confused with individual if blocks. So a different way to write this program that I see a lot of beginners do is, okay, if age triple equals 1, then do this. Okay, now watch this. If I say now, I'm just going to write another if statement. It's not an else if, it's an if. If age triple equals 2, And okay, does this work? Yes, this will still work just about the same for my 1s and my 2s, right? So what's the difference between what I had before and what I had here? Well, this one would actually be more efficient because as soon as it ran this, it knows that no other block will run. Whereas in this scenario, it is possible that this block could run and this block could run. You know, for example, I could say if age is greater than 0. Well, 1 is greater than 0, or 1 is 1. So this, it's like if the user types in 1, this block would run, and then this block would run. I'll say you are, greater than 0. So these are just the difference between how these run. So 1, it actually says you're greater than 0 because it temporarily changes it here. And then it changes it again by saying changes it. I'm changing the inner text of the output. It changes it once and then it overwrites it and changes it a second time. Okay, so depending on the scenario, in this particular case, one of these scenarios could be true, or we might want both of these to run. And just showing you the difference between like one big block statement. And these are individual if statements that are separated and not associated with one another, right? This one has no association with this one. Bring that back. You can also nest if statements. So in this case, if age is greater than 1, or if age is equal to 1, here I'm going to ask for a name, I suppose. I'm just going with please enter your name. Okay, please enter your age and please enter your name. So 1, and here I'm just making something up that's silly. I'll say if the name, so let's go ahead and read the name. Const name equals document get element by ID text name dot value. If name triple equals Evan, document get element by ID output dot enter text. Now if you want to append, I'll say plus equals, you get a discount. So I'm going to do a plus equals on my inner text to append and not overwrite. So if you're 1, notice I'm inside these curly braces. I want to clean this up so you can see it a little better. So notice every time I indent, it's going on a certain level based on how many nested I'll explain that better. I'm not explaining that very well. Oop. 1, 2. Okay, so my default indenting, this is 2 tabs, this is 4 tabs, this is 4 tabs, this is 6 tabs, because this if statement on line 11 is nested inside of the if statement on line 9. So this is called a nested if, right? That says, okay, if you're 1 and if your name is Evan, do this. So glance at it. If your name is 1, and it is case sensitive, so believe you are 1 years old, you get a discount. Let's reload it and say your age is 1 and your name is not Evan. It just says you are 1 years old. Okay, so this is an example of a nested if statement. And if you think about the potential outputs here, you're either 1 and it says you're 1, or if you're 1 and your name is Evan, then you get a discount. Otherwise, right, if you're 2 and your name is Evan, you don't get a discount, so on and so forth. Now, this is actually a little bit different than right, so I'm going to comment out that line of code. You might think, well, can't I just write if your age is 1 and name is Evan? Yes and no, and here's why. Because then you don't, in this case, you are 1 years old and you get a discount. Well, you kind of you lost something there, because before, if you were 1 years old, it would say, you know, you're 1 years old. And if your name was Evan, then it would say you're 1 years old and you get a discount, right? You lost a potential output here. So yes, you can write, these are called compound assignments, where you're testing multiple things for truth, right? On the left and the right have to be true for this overall expression to be true, right? You can do something like this. You could do, okay, if you're 1 or your name is Evan, so this means either on the left is true or on the right is true for this to be true. So the thing about these if statements is they should be written a lot of different ways, and there's subtle differences between writing like compound assignments and writing nested if statements. Right? So it depends on the scenario that you're trying to solve in the real world, whether you need this or you need nested. Right? And so the only way to know this is to start solving problems and start using them, and you will do that in lab environment, right? But just showing you all the different ways that these if statements can be written. Okay. The last thing here is switch. Let me go over switches. And so all I'm going to do is kind of go back to the simple example. If your age is 1, then you do something. I'm kind of going to take the name out because that this was the if else, so on and so forth. I'm going to replace that with what's called a switch. I don't know if that would have barked at me, but a switch can replace an if, else if, else if, else block. So that's exactly what I have kind of up here, is an if, else if, else if, else if, else. And a switch can replace that sometimes. And actually, Actually, I think in the new version of JavaScript, ECMAScript version, 2020, I think they changed something about switches. So I'm not even going to say sometimes, because I think they can do more than they used to be able to do. And the way a switch works is, okay, so you say, okay, what variable am I looking at? I'm looking at the age variable, and then you write what are called cases. And you say, okay, for case 0, or case 1, because we didn't have a case 0 before, I'm going to say you are 1 years old. And then you put the keyword break. And I'll have to fix this for my linter. Case 2. I'm actually just going to kind of test it here and clean up my... It does want a default case. The default case is like this, which is the default is equivalent to the else, which is I don't know how old you are. And this is just indenting, so let me go like that. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay. And we put that. And so you can replace this with this, and it's just another way of doing it. And arguably, a lot of times, it's a little bit easier to read a switch than this if, else, if block. Let's go ahead and glance at, you are 1 year old and you get a discount. And any other age says I don't know how old you are. That's because of the default. And I also put this keyword break in here, which basically says, you're done with the switch. And you're supposed to put a break in all of your cases. And so if I kind of go to case 2, and I go document, get element by ID, remember I took out the discount stuff. And you could fill it out from here. But just showing the syntax of a switch. Now, we need to dive a little bit into this. You notice these are only testing against single numbers. And so what historically, you could not check for range values in a switch. So, it was depending on their use case. It was like, okay, press 1 and open Notepad++. Press 2 and open Visual Studio. So a lot of times switches were used in like menu systems. Press the number 3 and do this. Press the number 4 and do that. Because it wasn't good for ranges. Like up here in a if statement, I could say if age is less than 50, then do something. That's a range. Less than 50 is a lot of numbers to evaluate. This is only evaluating one number at a time. Case 1, case 2. We're testing to see if age is 1. We're testing to see if age is 2. If age is not 1 or 2, you do the default, and it says, I don't know how old you are. Okay? I believe that changes, if memory serves me right. You can do ranges with cases now. I'm not going to dive into that because I got to kind of look up the syntax for that, but I do believe that has changed. It's not super critical at this point, because if you want to do ranges for now, just use your ifs and your if else's. Case, switch, JavaScript, range, JavaScript values. Yeah, there we go. Case 5 through 8, 9 through 11. Oh, no, that's not it. There it is. Yeah, there it is. There it is. So it doesn't take much to look that up. But so you can now have ranges for here. We're switching on the value that's in x, and we're checking to see if x is less than 5, x is less than, and you do a switch of true, means you enter the switch and then check x against a value. Okay, those are the basics of conditionals that make our programs smart. Questions before I stop?
No, I'm fine.
Okay.